This video was brought to you by Hitchhiker Toys. There's no better place to shop for toys, collectibles, and movies, including Killer Klowns merchandise seen in this review. If you're looking to expand your collection, head over to hitchhikertoys.com and check out their selection. And as always, thank you for watching my videos.
Welcome back everyone, I'm ThatGuyMatt. Do you know what has always managed to capture my imagination despite being just as scary? Outer space. So what happens when you throw clowns into the mix?
Pizza! Oh, pizza.
Well, the answer would be a beloved cult classic. Released in 1988 and directed by Stephen Chiodo, Killer Klowns from Outer Space tells the story of a group of teens enjoying their Friday night when their planet is suddenly invaded by a group of extraterrestrial circus clowns. With the rest of humanity at stake, the group must do everything in their power to put an end to the clowns and their games. The film was made on a budget of approximately $2 million, and as you'd expect with many cult classics, it wasn't a box office success. However, DVD sales and rentals for Killer Klowns was off the charts, not to mention the huge amount of merchandising. Before long, Killer Klowns became a household name in the horror genre. I remember the first time when I watched it on demand as a kid and have loved it ever since. It's not often that a film scares me as much as it makes me laugh, but that's exactly what I love about Killer Klowns. Despite the premise being so ridiculous, it just works. And not to mention it has it all. A kick-ass 80s soundtrack, comedy, horror, romance, and lots of popcorn and cotton candy. What's not to love? So without further ado, let's take our popcorn and candy and see why exactly Killer Klowns from Outer Space became such a cult film to begin with. The movie begins on a Friday night with Officer Mooney, played by John Vernon, when he's making his rounds. A college student is carrying a couple of bags of beer up the mountains for him and his friends. Mooney, however, is not too pleased.
Son of a bitch.
Side note, I do actually want to point out how funny it is that those beer cans are just white and just label them as beer. It kind of reminds me of like those generic coffee mugs you see that just say coffee on them. I don't know what made them so popular to do this in the 80s, but I guess it was cheap to produce. We then meet our protagonists, Mike and Debbie, played by Grant Kramer and Suzanne Snyder respectively. The two of them are on top of this mountain called the Top of the World, where a bunch of other teens are making out in their own vehicles and drinking beer. You know, the typical thing in all these movies. Maybe this is just me, but isn't it kind of awkward how they're all just making out next to one another? I guess the characters don't think so. Privacy be damned in this situation. Not long after, an ice cream truck pulls up. The two lovable idiots are Rich and Paul Terenzi, played by Michael Segal and Peter Lucchesi, respectively. They'll come into play later on, but in the meantime, Mike and Debbie are looking at the stars when all of a sudden a shooting star passes them. They decide it'd be more fun to go looking for the comet, so they do just that. An old man and his dog spot the shooting star themselves and go looking for it too. The old man ends up finding a circus tent in the middle of the forest, and while investigating, the dog is unfortunately kidnapped.
Pooh? Pooh Bear?
Ah, damn dog. It never fails for him to run off in the middle of the woods out next to a creepy circus tent. Pfft. You'd think they learn at some point. Furious about his missing dog, the old man attempts to take down the tent himself, but ends up regretting it almost immediately. It isn't long before we see one of the first clowns make an appearance. Now right off the bat, this movie is already doing something that most horror fans love, using practical effects. And not to mention, it looks top-notch even for its time. You know, the thing is, a vast majority of the budget actually went towards the practical effects, which is why I think it looks so good. And not to mention, this actually is the clown that's seen right here in my background, Jumbo. A pretty funny clown, if you ask me. Shortly after, however, we jump back to Mike and Debbie as they stumble onto the tent themselves. And out of boredom or ignorance, Mike stupidly decides to enter the tent. I mean, come on, Mike, don't you think this is a little bit suspicious?
No.
The two of them descend down the hall and take an elevator down a few levels. And it's here they discover there's some type of electrical orb within the circus tent.
This is no fun house.
Okay, now should be a good time to leave, right, Mike? I mean, after all, what circus tent has a fucking elevator down to an electrical current? The two then make it into what appears to be a freezer room full of cotton candy. Debbie makes the smart suggestion of leaving as they feel this is not where they belong. However, Mike, being the dense boyfriend that he is, insists that everything is totally fine.
What are you talking about? Of course it is. Look.
You know what? I think I've lost my appetite for cotton candy. The two of them hide, but are quickly discovered once they drop their light source. So they run like hell, but not before being shot with a rather peculiar weapon.
Are you okay?
I think so. Popcorn, why? Popcorn!
Because the clowns, that's why.
It doesn't seem like a very practical weapon. You'd think for killer clowns they probably would have a more impressive arsenal, but oh well. The clowns lose sight of their target, so they make a balloon dog to track their scent. This is one of the funnier moments in the entire movie, especially because the dog actually barks. Not long after, the two head back into town to warn everyone. However, due to the threat being extraterrestrial clowns, Mike knows that nobody will actually believe them, so Debbie suggests they go to a friend of theirs that can help. They meet up with Officer Dave, played by John Nelson, and explain in detail what they saw. Despite how ridiculous it sounds, Dave is willing to actually hear them out. Mooney, however, throws in his 2 cents.
Killer clowns from outer space. Holy shit.
Yeah, who the hell would actually believe anybody about extraterrestrial circus clowns? That's ridiculous, come on now. Now let me tell you about this one time where I actually found the abominable snowman in Alaska. Dave is obviously still skeptical, but ultimately decides to take a look. Shortly after, we're treated to an entertaining puppet show as we see a clown rise from the display and kill its victim. One of the few very genuine scary things in this movie. I mean seriously, that laugh is eerie as all hell. We regroup with our trio as they decide to take Debbie back to her house before heading to the mountains to investigate. Upon arriving, however, the tent is nowhere in sight.
So you're saying that hole is where the tent was? The tent made that hole, is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, Dave, we spent weeks or potentially even months digging this hole to pretend that there actually were killer clowns here. We get another entertaining montage of some clown sequences. We then cut back to Mike and Dave as they're investigating a bunch of abandoned vehicles from earlier. They find them all covered in a bunch of cotton candy, and this is obviously proof enough for Dave to know that something isn't right. Back at the police station, Mooney is receiving numerous calls from residents stating that they're being attacked by clowns, but of course, he doesn't believe any of it.
They want to play games? They're messing with the wrong guy.
Mike and Dave head back into town so they can get a hold of the state police, but not before stumbling on a clown that's performing a shadow puppet show. It starts off innocently enough with a rabbit, an elephant, and even a mermaid, but it isn't long before the clown unveils its ultimate trick.
Holy shit!
Believe it.
Scared shitless, they call Mooney to get the state police in, but he's still convinced it's all just a joke and cuts off his communication.
Well, it's going to take a hell of a lot more than a lame prank like this to get Curtis Mooney to throw in his badge, so fuck you! Over.
Dave rushes back to the station, while Mike gets a ride to Debbie's with the help of the Terenzi brothers. Back at the station, Mooney is continuing to ignore all the phone calls when he's visited by a clown. It's here where the clown messes with Mooney in some rather hilarious ways, such as spraying him with a flower and using fake hands to free himself from handcuffs. Just as Mooney finally manages to apprehend the clown, he's unfortunately killed afterwards.
What are you in for?
My biggest crime was not being funny enough, unfortunately. Dave arrives shortly after and finds the clown using Mooney as a puppet. He begins shooting at the clown, but as you'd expect it does nothing. That is until he aims for the nose, which turns out to be their weak spot. Talk about being on the nose, am I right? Sorry. Back over at Debbie's, she's getting dressed and we find out that she has some unexpected visitors. Oh, so that's what the popcorn was for. You know what? I'm not hungry anymore. The clowns manage to kidnap Debbie and put her inside of a big rubber ball. I can only imagine why she's being kept alive, but I'm sure it must be a fate far worse than death. Mike, Dave, and the Terenzi brothers chase after her. It turns out the clowns have moved their operations to a local amusement park, so they head inside the tent to save Debbie. While walking through a funhouse, they ask themselves why they're here, and more importantly why they're dressed as circus clowns. Paul decides to give his theory on the matter.
Maybe they're just cruising through the galaxy and stopped here for a bite to eat.
Oh yeah, Paul, that's totally true. They just wanted to stop by Human King and have a healthy serving of human with human on the side. Now obviously I joke about this, but I'm actually kind of glad that they didn't delve into the actual reason for why the clowns are here or why they're dressed as circus clowns. As the old saying goes, often when you explain things, that's when it tends to be not as fun. Not long after, they find Debbie and free her from her imprisonment. The three of them are chased through various rooms before reaching the climax, where they're surrounded by all the remaining clowns. It all seems hopeless, but then the Terenzi brothers crash through the wall and commit Deus Ex Machina. They use the truck's speaker and convince the clowns to leave them alone. As they're about to leave, however, they have one final surprise waiting for them.
I don't want to play here anymore. Can we go home now?
Revealing the true terror of this movie, JoJo, aka Clownzilla, which actually was portrayed by the director's brother, Charles, and it's just done on a larger scale to make him seem more imposing. It's pretty badass if you ask me. It tosses the ice cream truck in the corner and explodes, which kills the Terenzi brothers in the process. Dave allows Mike and Debbie to run through the hole in the wall as he distracts Clownzilla. Dave is out of ammunition for his gun and is desperate, so he uses his badge to pop the clown's nose, destroying the spaceship in the process. The clown car falls from the sky, and surprisingly, Dave walks out of it unscathed. Which, admittedly, is a bit of a stretch, but I'm willing to let it slide.
Wow, what a ride!
But I thought they blew up in the ice cream truck. How did they survive? Either way, the movie ends with our characters safe and sound. Or are they? Even if they did survive that, it's funny to think the clown still got the last laugh. Anyway, that was Killer Klowns from Outer Space. And the movie obviously is a product of the 80s and is cheesy as hell, but I still love it. The horror comedy genre is something that doesn't always work for me, and I think it's because some movies don't understand what they're trying to be. Some try to be too serious or too goofy, with no balance between either of them. The title alone is ridiculous, but Killer Klowns from Outer Space knows what it is and doesn't try to hide it. It's just a goofy film with several funny gags, a likable cast of characters, and a simple plot about extraterrestrial clowns invading Earth. But it also does have some tension sprinkled throughout to remind us that we are indeed watching a horror film. And if it isn't your cup of tea, you'll find out quickly. For me, however, the movie is just too charming to not like. However, I am willing to admit that I have a little bias as I loved it for a long time, even as a kid. The practical effects here are just top-notch. Everything from the clown makeup, to the costumes, to the sets and prosthetics, it all just feels thematically appropriate and just looks really good. Hell, the soundtrack as a whole is great. If I were to name some personal highlights, they would include the title theme, of course, the march, and the invasion. All three of those tracks are really well done and just fit the scene perfectly for what they're going for. As for the acting, all around it's about what you expect. It's nothing Oscar-worthy, and some lines can come off as really corny, but they did well enough given their roles. That said, however, Killer Klowns definitely has its cheesy moments and isn't perfect. And not to mention, some of the decisions made by the characters can be extremely questionable. The scene where the Terenzi brothers are separated, then miraculously show up at the end, is just absurd. Especially if you consider the fact that they blew up while inside the ice cream truck, and are also blown up inside the spaceship. Granted, I'm nitpicking, but as much as I love this film, it's not completely exempt from criticism. But sometimes we just have to let it slide, otherwise we wouldn't have a movie. All that said, Killer Klowns from Outer Space is a goofy horror film that knows exactly what it is. It's wacky, off the walls, comical, and doesn't shy away from it. And despite its rough edges, it still manages to make me laugh and scared all the same. It's not for everyone, but admittedly nothing is. But if you're into campy horror films, then you definitely should seek this one out. I always love revisiting the classics. But I think for right now I'm done with popcorn and cotton candy. Ugh. Anyway, thank you guys all for watching. This has been ThatGuyMatt, and I will see you guys all next time. Take care.